Hello and welcome to A Radical for Jesus. Today we're going to be looking at what Jesus says through the scriptures on the subject of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So let's begin by turning to Matthew chapter 5, and we'll look at verses 31 and 32. It hath been said, Whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery. Now, is there something that's unclear about that? I don't think so. It seems what Jesus is saying here is, you've heard it was said, if somebody's going to divorce his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. And that's referring back to Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4, where there was an allowance given for a man to divorce his wife and she could go out and marry someone else. But here Jesus says that if someone divorces his wife, he causes her to commit adultery. In other words, if that lady goes out and remarries, Jesus says he holds her husband responsible for throwing her out of the home. Now, there's an interesting clause in there that some people refer to as the exception clause, and it's caused quite a bit of confusion. It says saving for the cause of fornication, and there's some debate as far as what that word fornication means. I submit to you that it doesn't really matter in this context, because Jesus doesn't give any exception here for remarriage. He only gives an exception for whether or not the husband causes his wife to commit adultery. And notice that in the last part of it, he added, Whosoever shall marry her that is divorced committeth adultery. Jesus said, hey, even if this woman was innocently divorced, maybe her husband found someone he liked better, she's still guilty of adultery if she remarries, and so is the guy she marries. So that seems like it's fairly simple. So let's go on then. Matthew 19, verses 3 through 12. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh? Wherefore they are no more twain but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. They say unto him, Why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement, and to put her away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. His disciples say unto him, If the case of the man be so with his wife, it is good not to marry. But he said unto them, All men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. Now, notice here the Pharisees came and asked Jesus, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause or not? And Jesus said, Well, wait a minute. Haven't you read? God made them male and female. God joined the husband and wife together and said that they are no more twain but one flesh. Now that's a very important point, because there's a lot of people that take what follows this passage, or the down at verse 9, and interpret everything else through that. But rather, we have to interpret whatever Jesus said through the view of this here, that they are no more twain but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. So right there we have Jesus commanding that nobody is ever to get divorced. he said, "Let not man put asunder what God has joined together." That is a clear-cut command against divorce. And then we have an exception. And there's a lot of debate about what this exception means. However, whatever it means, there's an interesting fact about this particular passage. This is the only time we have Jesus specifically talking to the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees knew the law, and they were Jews. They were the Jewish leaders, and they were living in their time. And what Jesus said to them had to apply to their time. However, we're going to go on now to Mark 10, and we're going to see what happened whenever his disciples came to him and said, "Now, Jesus, would you clarify that for us?" We're going to go back to Mark 10. We're going to read verses 2 through 12. And the Pharisees came to him, to Jesus, and asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife?" tempting him. And he answered and said unto them, "What did Moses command you?" And they said, "Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement, and to put her away." And Jesus answered and said unto them, "For the hardness of your heart he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of the creation God made them male and female. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." And in the house his disciples asked him again of the same matter. And he saith unto them, "Whosoever shall put away his wife, and marry another, committeth adultery against her. And if a woman shall put away her husband, and be married to another, she committeth adultery." Now, that sounds pretty simple to me. And note, this is a parallel passage. It's actually referring to the exact same occurrence that we just read about in Matthew. And Jesus said clearly that the provision of Deuteronomy 24 was never God's true will. That was only an exception made for hard hearts. He said, however, at the beginning, God made them male and female. And once again, we have him saying, "What God has joined together, let not man put asunder." But then, it stops right there. And instead of giving his response to the Pharisees, God has here what he told his disciples. It says that in the house, his disciples asked him again of the same matter. So this was afterwards, after he talked with the Pharisees, they get into the house. And if you remember, his disciples were amazed whenever he had told the Pharisees this. They said, "Whoa, if that's the case, it's good for a man not to marry." I mean, they were shocked by what Jesus had said. So they said, "Now, Jesus, is this really what you mean?" Jesus said, "Yeah. Whosoever puts away his wife and marries another commits adultery. If a woman does it, if a woman divorces her husband, marries somebody else, she commits adultery." Now, if I were going to give an exception to something, here's how I would generally do this. I would say, let's just take divorce, for example. I would say, nobody should ever get divorced or remarried. And then, if somebody asked me about it, so nobody should ever divorce, then I would say, well, if the wife runs out on him, then he can get remarried. That's generally how you give an exception. But here we find that whenever the disciples asked for clarification, Jesus gave no exception, which would lead me to believe that perhaps he was referring only, in the exception clause, he was referring only to the Jewish custom of betrothal, which required a divorce to break the betrothal. So then we go on back to Luke 16:18. And what's interesting about this passage is that it reads very, very much like Matthew 19:9, except it doesn't have an exception clause in it. "Whosoever putteth away his wife, and marrieth another, committeth adultery. And whosoever marrieth her that is put away from her husband, committeth adultery." So for the third time, we now have Jesus saying that if somebody marries a divorced woman, that man commits adultery. We have Jesus saying that if a man divorces his wife and marries someone else, he commits adultery. And back in Matthew 5:32, Jesus had said that the woman committed adultery when she remarried. Okay, let's go on back then to Romans 7. Romans chapter 7 and verse 1 through 4. Know ye not, brethren, for I speak to them that know the law, how that the law hath dominion over a man as long as he liveth? For the woman which hath an husband is bound by the law to her husband so long as he liveth. But if the husband be dead, she is loosed from the law of her husband. So then, if, while her husband liveth, she be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she is free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she be married to another man. Wherefore, my brethren, ye also are become dead to the law by the body of Christ, that ye should be married to another, even to him who is raised from the dead, that we should bring forth fruit unto God. Now, in reality, this wasn't actually talking about divorce. God wasn't specifically addressing divorce here. But it brings out an important principle here, that if a woman divorces her, if while a woman's husband is living, it says, she's married to another man, she will be called an adulteress. We know that divorce does not end the marriage covenant or the marriage ties. If divorce could end the marriage ties, it would not be adultery for the husband who had divorced his wife. It would not be adultery for him to remarry someone else. And it would not be adultery for anyone to remarry the woman he had divorced. Therefore, we know that divorce does not end the marriage covenant. So, this verse applies in the case of divorce and remarriage. Now, there's something else, though, that's quite applicable here. In verse 4, it says that we have become dead to the law so that we can marry somebody else, Jesus Christ. What's significant about that is that that tells us we are dead to the provisions of Deuteronomy 24 and to the restrictions of Deuteronomy 24, which say that if a woman is divorced by her husband and goes and marries someone else, she can never return to her husband. We're dead to that, period. That's over. So I feel like that is a very important key for understanding the will of God in divorce and remarriage. Finally, let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We'll look at verses 10 and 11. Unto the married I command, yet not I, but the Lord. Let not the wife depart from her husband. But, and if she depart, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband, and let not the husband put away his wife. Now, what this is saying is that a husband and wife are not to even separate. But if the wife departs, she is to remain unmarried or to be reconciled to her husband. And notice there, some people have pointed out that it says, let her remain unmarried. And they say, oh, well, the marriage was over. No, it isn't, because the next thing it says is that the husband is, it says, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. So he's still her husband. Finally then, in the last part of the chapter, in case you aren't convinced by now, in case you missed something, God sums up his will regarding divorce and remarriage and marriage. And what ends a marriage? It says in verse 39, the wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth. But if her husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. May God bless you as you read his word, study his word, and apply it to your life. And join me in being a radical for Jesus.
He said if we love him, we must keep his commands. So will you be a radical?